Hey guys, welcome to the DarshanTalks recording and podcast. On this podcast, we discuss life science, legal, and regulatory issues, especially in the context of medical affairs, clinical research, and promotional compliance. If you like these videos and podcasts, please like, leave a comment, and subscribe. This video and podcast is brought to you by the Kulkarni Law Firm. Reach out to the Kulkarni Law Firm for advice on PRC review, MRC review, developing SOPs, training, audit compliance, and more. Reach out to Darshan at kulkarnilawfirm.com or call me at 302-252-6959. Or you can just visit our website at DarshanTalks.com or visit the law firm website at kulkarnilawfirm.com. That's KULKARNI lawfirm.com. Hey guys, I'm really excited to have this conversation today. Our guest is I was very lucky to get her. I reached out to her on, I believe it was LinkedIn, and she said yes, she'd be open to coming on. So I'm really excited. I'm going to let her introduce herself in a few seconds, but we're hoping to talk a little bit about keynote speaking and the journey that got her to doing exactly this and how it all weaves in together to hopefully talk a little bit about how to improve and impact patient lives. So Sonal, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi. So nice to be on with you, Darshan. So my name is Sonal Bhatia. I'm a physician by training. I'm an internist, actually, and I currently am the Chief Medical Officer for rare disease at Pfizer.
So you have a little something of knowledge around the space of rare diseases and patient engagement. And I do want to clarify for those people who are listening in by audio podcast, she does not represent the views of her current or former employers, including Pfizer. So we want to put that out there for sure. But let's talk a little bit about the beginning of this. One of the things people talk about when they go into med school is how they want to help their patients. And you had the unique opportunity recently to reflect on exactly that purpose because you did something unique. So you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so last week I had the honor of going back to my medical school 20 years post-graduation and be the keynote speaker for their white coat ceremony. So this is a ceremony for the incoming class of medical students who are starting their journey in medicine, where they get down by their white coat, and a faculty member actually puts a white coat on their shoulders, and it's the beginning or the initiation of a career in medicine. And I had the opportunity to give the keynote speech, which truly made me reflect on, and more importantly, communicate the why behind what I wanted to do in my career, which was really to help and serve patients. And that it's such a noble cause to be a physician, but you always need to know what's driving your purpose and what motivates you to be able to meet the needs of our patients every day. And, Darshan, I have a very unique career journey. Perhaps not, I think a lot of colleagues now join industry after being a physician. But I started my journey 24 years ago when I decided I want to be a physician. So at that time, moving to pharma was not a common path. It was actually not known. We didn't learn about that in medical school. And so as a keynote speaker, I was able to share my experiences, my reasons for pivoting through my journey from a traditional clinical pathway to one that I today find extremely fulfilling in the work that I do every day.
So it's really interesting, right? You're talking about the non-traditional path of pharma, which is kind of a little funny to those of us who work in the industry, because everywhere I look, I'm surrounded by clinicians and people who are experts just like yourself. But one of the things I will also admit is that when I talk to friends of mine who are clinicians and I tell them that I work in pharma, one of the looks I get is oh, you work on the dark side. And I always react to that in it's a visceral reaction in that they see this as a path to money, but less noble somehow. And I go, I'm literally helping bring the drugs that help you treat your patients. And I've done 20 years of work as a pharmacist in a hospital, in, well, pretty much any pharmacy setting there is. But how do you deal with that question that you get asked, or at least the look you might receive on you chose the dark side?
Yeah. That's a question that I think over time will become less and less of a question, because you're right. There's so many clinicians, MDs, PhDs, PharmDs. We all make up the industry from a scientific perspective. But until you're actually in it, you don't realize it's not the dark side. You only believe that when you're on the outside of it. And quite frankly, I'm sure you and I felt the same well before we joined industry. But my reason to have pivoted was because when I was actually in residency, and I loved seeing patients, I loved, my best part was clinic, where I could have my patients come in, not just tell me what was bothering them, but I actually knew their whole life story and what was happening in their world with their spouses or the challenges they're facing. And it becomes a very important relationship as a physician and as a doctor. But I also witnessed my best friend from med school develop breast cancer and pass away. And now she was in her late 20s. So, you have to reflect on 2 decades ago, in your 20s, you didn't really get breast cancer. And when you did, she passed away. And it was an eye-opener for me, because I felt that we as physicians were being trained to treat our patients with a toolbox that only had the toolkits we had in that time and space. And I felt frustrated because I wanted to be able to offer up more. I thought, why are we not looking forward? Why are we not thinking about the future generations? Why are we not finding a path and a solve so that these patients don't have to die, but that they have an extra set of treatment options that to prolong their lives or better their lives or do something better with longevity than what I was witnessing back then. And that frustration made me decide that I wanted to pursue something else, utilizing my degree, my shiny degree that I had received from med school. And that is exactly why I finished residency. I got myself board certified, keeping a path open in case things didn't work out for me. But that's when I decided to pursue what industry may look like. And I had no knowledge about it. But I have to say, the first medicine that I worked on was something called inhaled insulin. Now, it didn't work out, but that was innovative. And the promise of breakthrough innovative medicines and being able to bring an element to patients and physicians that didn't exist before, that's kind of why I'm in it. Because the moment you talk to a patient and say, I'm sorry, this is your disease or your diagnosis, but there's no treatment option, I don't want any of my peer physicians to have to use that sentence. And that's why I'm on the side of pharma, where we're forging ahead, driving science, driving innovation, thinking of patients' unmet needs and developing a medicine. After a lot of failures of clinical trials, when we have that first win, that is the moment where you go back in and say, that's what I'm in it for. And that's why I'm here.
Which is really interesting to me, right? So, I have so many questions that come out of this. So let me start by going down this path, and then I'm going to backtrack a little bit. But the first question I have is, you talk about the impact that you're making as a result of your role. And you're talking a lot about how you're able to, for lack of a better term, from behind the scenes, hopefully impact patients' lives. And you, as you pointed out, it was really important for you to be a clinician, and you had to give that up so that other clinicians could do their jobs better. But what do you think about something like the Physician Payment Sunshine Act, which basically says that, are you familiar with that one? Okay, so as the Sunshine Act, for those people who are not familiar with it, it's essentially a law that says that any payments to physicians, any transfers of value to physicians have to be reported. To me, that suggests that physicians are very easily enamored by the $2 pens and the $4 books that you might give them. What is your take as a clinician? And I'm not, this is again, not officially Pfizer's position, not even officially any company's position. This is just as a clinician, what is your take? Because you probably saw these companies come in and then promote their products. What was your take? What was your response then? What is your response now?
I think as a clinician, it's really important for us clinicians to be informed of what's happening beyond what we've learned in medical school. I think the medical school training is the foundation that we get, but to build on it requires us to continue to learn over time. And unless we do that through whatever pathways exist, we're always going to continue to use the same toolkit that we graduated from. And yet, if you look at the last 20 years, there's so much innovation in journeys, in treatment guidelines, in types of medicines, that if you're not aware of them as a clinician because you haven't had those dialogues with the experts from the companies that are developing it, then you're just not going to know what to bring to the patient anymore. And I think that is a duty that we have as a clinician who's practicing, and as a physician who's in pharma. Our duty is to communicate the medicines, the science, the efficacy and the safety, and then help our peers make the right decisions for the right patients, because every patient has a particular medicine that's right for them and not one size fits all.
And I think that's kind of the important piece, right? I think clinicians in general don't fully understand that not everyone from pharma is trying to sell to them, which is an unusual thing to realize, that there's a company and there's an entire division within a company that its sole job is to educate and not sell, because it's different from any other company type I know of. For those people who don't know, that's often the medical affairs function. Or sometimes health economics may also be a component of that or a separate unit. But the other piece that comes out from that is, do you find yourself having to re-educate clinicians, and do you have the opportunity in your present role or in similar roles as you were getting there to connect back with former friends, colleagues, or just other physicians and talk to them about what's coming down the pike, and enable yourself to have those experiences that I'm guessing you're getting less of than you would have preferred?
Listen, I work in medical affairs, and so that's exactly our role, and that's what I'm extremely passionate about. I started in industry in medical affairs. I never went to any other area because I felt I was exactly there at home, being able to communicate the science to my peers who were seeing patients. And I think we're all in a big ecosystem. Yes, we have the patient, we have the physician, we have us in pharmaceutical medicine, we have our regulators who are helping to get the medicine approved in the right way. We have payers who are helping to solve on how do we get this appropriately paid for. We're all in it with this patient at the center. And within medical affairs, our job is simply to not only understand the science, understand the clinical trials that are coming through, but bring the patient's voice to actually change those trial designs so that they're going to have a better chance at not only succeeding, but having an approvability with the FDA or the EMA or other regulators around the world. And more importantly, that the patient's outcomes, the outcomes that matter to them, are being considered within the trial so that they're going to have a benefit. And that is the role of medical affairs. Once we actually get it through the approval system, we then sit with our physicians, my own peers, and we talk about what is this new disease, if it's a new one, what is the treatment journey, how can we help shave off years from the diagnosis pathway, because for example, in rare disease, it could take a decade to actually get a patient diagnosed. How do we shorten that diagnosis gap? Because that prolongs a patient's healthy life. And how do we change treatment guidelines? So we work with societies, professional societies to adapt the treatment guidelines that physicians utilize so that they include the novel new medicines that we're bringing through. And, a great example is one of our recent medicines that we brought through in rare disease. It's a cardiomyopathy that used to be just a sentence in medical school. All you needed to know is the clue words to get through your board exams. Right. And today, it's actually a textbook just on that disease. And that's how much we've evolved in 25 years. And the evolution will continue at a much faster pace because now we have more innovative diagnostic platforms. We have quicker ways to assess these rare diseases that we can actually talk about, assess. We have very strong patient advocacy groups. Their strength helps us to understand their treatment journey so that we can find what the unmet need is and solve for it. And then in medical affairs, we also generate a lot of real world evidence because once the medicine's in a physician's hand and in a patient's hand, we want to continue to see how the medicine's working in real life settings so that we continue to have an effective, but more importantly, a safe medicine for the patients. So through the continuum of their journey, medical affairs plays a huge role, and our knowledge of science, our ability to work with our peers and understand the patient's perspective, listen to them, bring their thoughts and perspectives into the journey is so important. It makes a big difference.
So as you kind of got into the area of patient centricity, which is the huge buzzword right now, right? Everyone's talking about we want to be patient centric. The funny part is we've been doing patient centric stuff for at least the last 20 years. It's just become a buzzword the last few years. And I would argue that even today, it's just that, a buzzword. We haven't gotten as deep into it as we probably should have, considering in the end, this is all about the patient. We're all doing this for the patient. So I guess my question for you, and you've kind of given some hints to that by talking about engaging in clinical trial design. But could you talk a little bit about where you've seen opportunities to bring in the patient's voice?
Yeah, so I agree with you that we are moving the needle in the right direction. That is the first and foremost positive out of this. But there's always a lot more to be done for our patients. And I truly believe that if every day, every action, every project that we're considering, if we ask, how does this benefit the patient? Or does it not? Or if it has no value to them? If there's no value to them, why are we doing it? Could those resources be utilized in a way that's going to drive something that is truly patient-centric? And,
Can I answer that for you, though, by the way? Because it's the... You asked a question of why are we doing something if it doesn't benefit the patient? And unfortunately, the way our system's set up, because the FDA wants to see the answer. And it may not be, even though the FDA says that patients are important, what they want to see doesn't necessarily match what the patients think is valuable. So I'd love to hear your balance into that as well.
I think there's a balance to that statement. The FDA has to go with certain clinical endpoints, and therefore the pharmaceutical companies have to develop a clinical trial with those hard endpoints that make sense to get them across the regulatory hurdles. But at the same time, a patient-reported outcome is very important. And those can be put into the clinical trial along with the endpoints that the FDA is requiring. Because at the end of the day, if you have only a patient-reported outcome, but it's not going to prove the safety of a medicine through the statistical impact that a trial will demonstrate, then what is truly the value to the patient? I mean, we're responsible for bringing something that's effective, that is safe, and now that we also include patient-reported outcomes so that their outcomes are being measured, and therefore they are very informed when they're deciding on which medicine they want to use for their disease. And honestly, patients have evolved so much. They're now the educated patient. They want to learn about their disease. They want to know all treatment options out there. They will look through clinical trials, and then they will have an educated conversation with their physician. And together, they're deciding on the right treatment option. And therefore, the FDA has taken stances on this and now includes patient-reported outcomes. There's a lot of examples where patients have actually gone to the FDA with the pharmaceutical company to demonstrate what is this disease, what is the treatment journey, what matters to the drug development process from a clinical trial perspective, and what matters to the patient. And when you hear a patient's story, that is when the unmet need becomes more than just something you write on a paper. It becomes real. It's about a human. So I think we're really building quite a bit and learning from each other. This is where the industry is working together to raise the voice of patients. It's not perfect today, but it's much better than it was before. And I'm hopeful and I'm confident that as we navigate through this, keeping the patient's voice center, it's just going to be stronger. And you can look at patient advocacy groups for certain rare diseases. It's unbelievable how strong they are, how tight they are, how much knowledge they have. I think we as physicians have to recognize that sometimes a patient comes in and knows a lot more of the disease, and we're learning from them. And then we're applying our science, our knowledge, working with pharmaceutical companies to then weave in what the unmet need is with them. But without listening to them and knowing what they're facing, we wouldn't understand that.
It's so beautifully put. I'm kind of thinking about several elements I've seen around engaging with patients. And one of the, we start talking about clinical trials. One of the areas I've been pulled in is this idea of you're pulling patients or subjects into clinical trials. But what happens at the end of the study? You sort of just go, yeah, thank you for being part of this. And the EMA, as you know, has put out policy 70, policy 43 that requires that there be lay summaries about the studies that you conducted. Are you seeing, from your vantage point, I don't know if you're in your particular company, you have the vantage point of being able to see if patients are benefiting from these lay summaries? And do you think that as an industry, we need to do better than meet just the bare minimum of what the regulators are requiring, or if there's just a better way that we could be achieving that goal? That question makes sense?
Yeah, we are, this is where data becomes so critical post a clinical trial. You can stop a trial and just move on to the next medicine. But this is where medical affairs comes in and says, okay, now we're going to follow patients in a real world setting and continue to see how they do. Now, certain patients after a trial, depending on what the disease is, may stay on an extra part of the trial where we monitor their safety and monitor their efficacy for a few more years. And then at scientific venues, we're able to share how the continuum pertains to that patient once the trial got completed for the sake of a regulatory approval. We also create registries, and registries are a way to generate a lot of data in a very broad, unclinical type of setting, right? So where it's no longer stringent as a clinical trial is, but you're really seeing how the medicine is performing for those patients that have received it, and look at signals, or you look at it, and it may not be negative. It could be a positive signal. It could be a potential new treatment that comes out of it. It could be a reason to run a phase 4 trial, although real world evidence now offers so much in a more cost-effective and a much faster pathway than a traditional phase 4 study that we used to do in the past. So the utilization of EMRs and real-world data through registries and the data you get from wearables is becoming really the centerpiece of how we evaluate our medicine and how the patient is performing with these post-clinical trial. Now, also lay summaries for them to understand what they went through, what they may witness, what the future is. that is becoming also not necessarily something that was done consistently in the past, but will continue to be done more consistently. I think health literacy and understanding what your disease is, what does this study that we just published mean to a patient, so that they can also get educated and understand it, is becoming more and more the norm. We're starting to do it in pilots in different diseases. We're actually evaluating how it's being received, what the impact is, and that is driving the need to start to do it more consistently. And I think ultimately, industry-wide, we're going to uplift how we communicate to our patients so that they can understand the plethora of data that is being generated and published and presented.
I love it. I mean, quite honestly, I could have an entire 2-hour conversation with you on just different types of real-world evidence and talking about health tech and how that's going to change everything. I want to have a different conversation with you about how you get to work now with healthcare providers to educate them about how you go from a single word in a textbook to having a textbook about that word. I mean, there's just, and then talking about health literacy and the like. But as you know, I try to keep these conversations a little tight. I do hope you'll consider coming back and having an additional conversation about this. Before we go, any last parting words?
I just, to all the listeners out there, I would say whatever you're doing, just do it with passion. You gotta feel it from inside, because that's when you're really delivering to patients and doing what's right. And I think at the end of the day, we're all in this ecosystem focused on doing what's right for the patient. We all do it differently. We all have different platforms we're servicing, right? Whether we're working in a company or in a hospital or in the regulatory world, but ultimately the patient is at the center. And I'm confident that that's how everyone sees it.
These conversations are not intended to be legal, regulatory, or clinical advice and may not be right for you. These conversations are intended for educational purposes only. Conversations on this forum do not create an attorney